You have destroyed an army, Hannibal, but Rome has many more. The year is 217 BC. The Roman Republic is reeling. They just lost 25,000 men at the Battle of Trebia because a hot-headed consul fell for a classic bait-and-switch. But if you know anything about the Roman meta, you know they don't do surrender. They just respawn, grind more XP, and double down. Following the disaster at Trebia, Rome elects a new consul named Gaius Flaminius. Flaminius is a populist politician, a crowd pleaser, and a guy who desperately wants to farm some glory by being the man who finally slays the Carthaginian boogeyman. Hannibal, who is currently marching his armies south through the miserable malaria-infested swamps of central Italy, knows exactly what kind of player Flaminius is: aggressive, impatient, and completely predictable. Hannibal's army is sick, starving, and Hannibal himself literally loses an eye to a swamp infection. He's playing with half his screen blacked out, but he's still playing 4D chess. He intentionally marches past Flaminius's camp, burning Roman farmland along the way just to draw aggro. Flaminius, completely blinded by rage and the desire for a quick victory, takes the bait and chases after him. Hannibal leads the Romans to a place called Lake Trasimene. On one side is the deep water of the lake. On the other side are steep, heavily forested hills. Hannibal hides his entire army up in those hills under the cover of a thick, soup-like morning fog. He essentially uses the real-life fog of war to set up the ultimate camper strategy. Flaminius marches his army right into the narrow pass in a long, disorganized column, and then the trap springs. The Carthaginians charge down from the hidden hills, completely pinning the Romans against the water. There is no formation, there is no strategy, it's a pure slaughter. The Romans are cut to pieces, and many drown in the lake trying to escape in their heavy armor. Flaminius is killed, and Rome suffers another massive 15,000-player wipe. At this point, the Roman servers are practically crashing. The citizens are terrified. Religious leaders are running around claiming the RNG gods have cursed them. Statues are supposedly sweating blood, and the sacred chickens are refusing to eat. The Senate hits the absolute panic button. They activate a special constitutional cheat code, the Dictator. In times of extreme crisis, Rome could appoint one man to have absolute power for 6 months. They pick an older, conservative guy named Fabius Maximus. Now, Fabius looks at Hannibal's stats and realizes a terrifying truth. We cannot beat this guy in a 1v1. His tactical buffs are way too high. So Fabius invents a completely new meta. It's called the Fabian Strategy. He absolutely refuses to fight Hannibal in a pitched battle. Instead, he just shadows him from the high ground. He cuts off supply lines, picks off stragglers, and essentially just griefs Hannibal's army as they march around Italy. Fabius earns the nickname Cunctator, which translates to the Delayer. Strategically, it was brilliant. It starved Hannibal of resources and gave Rome time to rebuild its armies. But politically, the Roman citizens absolutely hated it. They thought Fabius was a massive coward. They didn't want to play a slow, boring, sweaty war of attrition. They wanted to see Carthage get punched in the mouth. Even Fabius's own second-in-command, a guy named Minucius, got impatient, tried to PvP Hannibal directly, and almost got his entire squad wiped out before Fabius had to swoop in and carry the team. So, when Fabius's 6-month term expires in 216 BC, Rome decides they are done playing it safe. They elect 2 new consuls, Varro and Paulus, and these guys are given one simple objective: build the biggest doomstack army Rome has ever seen, find Hannibal, and unlive him. Rome raises an unprecedented 86,000 soldiers. To put that in perspective, that is roughly the capacity of a modern NFL stadium, all carrying swords and shields. They march south to a little supply depot town called Cannae, where Hannibal is waiting with only 50,000 men. The Romans have a massive numbers advantage, and the battlefield is a flat, dusty plain. No hills to hide in, no lakes to get trapped against, no fog of war. Just a straight-up, fair fight. Exactly what Rome wants. But Rome had one fatal flaw in its operating system: terrible co-op mechanics. Because there were two consuls, Roman law dictated that they had to alternate command of the army every single day. Paulus was cautious, but Varro was aggressive, and on August 2nd, 216 BC, Varro had the controller. Varro looks across the flat plain and decides to use a simple strategy: the Zerg rush. He stacks his heavy infantry incredibly deep in the center, packing his men tightly together. His plan is to just walk forward and use raw DPS to punch a massive hole right through the center of the Carthaginian line. But Hannibal has been studying the map. He realizes that a strong wind called the Vulturnus blows across the plain of Cannae every afternoon. He positions his army so that the wind is at their backs, meaning the Roman army is going to have tons of dry dust blowing straight into their eyes. Hannibal is literally using the weather mechanics against them. And now Hannibal is about to pull off the greatest tactical masterpiece in military history: the Double Envelopment. Hannibal arranges his front line in a crescent moon shape, bowing outward toward the Romans. But here's the crazy part. He puts his weakest, least reliable troops, his Celtic and Iberian allies, many of whom are fighting bare-chested, in the very center. He takes his elite, battle-hardened African veterans and hides them on the far left and right edges. Sneak 100. Adding insult to injury, those African veterans are actually wearing Roman armor they looted from the dead bodies at Trebia and Trasimene. Sneak 100. The Romans march forward. The ground shakes under the boots of 80,000 men. Blinded by the dust, they slam into the Carthaginian center. And just as Hannibal had planned, his center begins to buckle. The Celtic and Iberian troops slowly step backward under the immense pressure of the Roman meat shield. The Romans, thinking they are winning the game, push harder and harder, rushing into the center of the battlefield to get a piece of the action. But the Carthaginian center doesn't break, it just bends. It turns from a crescent moon pointing outward to a U-shape pointing inward. The Romans have completely lost their formation and have unknowingly walked right into a giant pocket. Then Hannibal springs the trap. His elite, heavily armored troops on the edges pivot inward and attack the Roman flanks. Suddenly, the Romans are being hit from the front, the left, and the right. They're packed in so tight that the soldiers in the middle literally don't have room to raise their swords. They're crushed together, shoulder to shoulder, unable to swing their weapons or even breathe properly. Meanwhile, Hannibal's elite cavalry, who had already easily chased off the inferior Roman horsemen, turn around and smash into the rear of the Roman infantry. The doors are closed. The Romans are completely surrounded. What happens next isn't a battle, it's an industrial meat grinder. For hours, the Carthaginians slowly tighten the circle, cutting down the Romans from the outside in. The sheer scale of the carnage is unimaginable. By sunset, between 50 and 70,000 Romans are dead. It is the bloodiest single day in the history of Western warfare. A staggering 20% of the adult male population of Rome was wiped out in a single afternoon. Over 80 Roman senators, holding a massive amount of political power, died in the dirt that day. Hannibal has done the impossible. He has completely shattered the invincible Roman war machine. As they stand victorious on a battlefield soaked in blood, Hannibal's cavalry commander, Hannibal, begs him to take his horsemen, march on the city of Rome immediately, and finish the game. He promises Hannibal they could be dining in the Roman capital within 5 days. But Hannibal hesitates. He knows he doesn't have the siege equipment or the supply lines to take a massive fortified city with high walls. He refuses the order. Hannibal famously looks at him and says, "Truly, the gods have not given all things to one man. You know how to win a victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use it." Hannibal hopes after taking an L this massive, Rome will finally surrender. He even offers to ransom the thousands of Roman prisoners he took during the battle, but Rome didn't surrender. The Roman Senate refused to pay a single coin for the prisoners, essentially telling Hannibal, "Keep them, they lost."
They banned women from crying in the streets so the city wouldn't look weak, and they passed a law making the word peace illegal to say out loud. Rome was not going to quit, they were going to rebuild the server. Join us next time for part 3, as Rome decides if they can't beat Hannibal in Italy, they're going to find a new prodigy general to take the war right to his front door.